Focus is one of the key skills for poker performance, yet most players struggle with it. If you're watching this right now, there's a good chance that you have difficulty holding your attention where you want it to for long poker sessions. You might notice you get distracted whilst in a poker hand or during a study session, and I'm sure you'd love to be able to turn up the dial to have a high level of focus more consistently. If that sounds like you, then this video is going to be just what you need. Now, before we get started, if you'd like to know exactly where you might have a leak in your mental game, I've created a free assessment in the description, which will tell you which skill you personally need to work on to take your mental game to the next level. With that being said, let's dive into today's video. So why is it so challenging to focus? Why can't we just decide what we want to focus on and to hold our attention there for as long as we want? Before we answer these questions, we first need to define what we mean by focus. As it relates to performance, focus can be defined as your ability to concentrate your attention and your energy on a specific task while minimizing distractions and irrelevant information. In essence, focus is the ability to direct and sustain your attention where you want it, whether that's playing 4 tables of poker or on a study session trying to work out some solver sims. You want your full attention on what you're doing. Unfortunately, this often isn't what happens, and we find ourselves distracted. Now, there are 2 main reasons we get distracted. The first is how our brain has been wired. If you go back to our hunter and gatherer days, it was a massive survival advantage to constantly be scanning your environment, to always be vigilant, always be on the lookout for potential threats and dangers. This wired our brains to constantly take in information in our peripheral awareness. We'll come back to what that means and how to get control of this later in the video. But being vigilant kept us alive. Our brains are also wired to seek novelty and pleasure. We move towards things that are interesting, that could be new or exciting. And again, this leads us to go towards distractions in our environments. Ever been playing a poker session, trying to concentrate, and the thought of a YouTube video comes into your mind, or a poker hand you played earlier, or a conversation with a friend? All of these things happen because either novelty or something interesting or pleasurable came into your awareness. On top of how the brain is wired, the second reason we get distracted is because of how our brains have been conditioned in the modern world. We are bombarded with information, with notifications, and with stimulus from all angles, whether it's our phone devices, social media, messaging friends, the internet in general. We have got so much things competing for our attention, and over time, this leads us to fragment our attention. More and more things battling for that limited resource called attention, and very quickly, we become quite fragmented. We spend most of our days jumping from one thing to the next. Social media apps in particular are very skilled at getting us to consume short content. That's a short on YouTube or Twitch or TikTok. Very good at capturing our attention for a small amount of time and basically taking us away from what we could be doing. All right, so we've got this battle with our wiring, and then we've got this battle with our environment. Now, we aren't going to be able to update our brain's hardware anytime soon, and our environment is not going to get any less distracting. If anything, over time, it's going to get more and more distracting as technology becomes more immersive and more things pull our attention. So what do? What we can do, however, is fine-tune the brain's operating system, effectively upgrading the brain's software to allow us to focus more intensely and for longer. I'll be giving you an exact system for how to do this at the end of this video. For now, we need to understand a deep concept, and this is our consciousness and our conscious experience of life. When you stop and reflect, you realize your consciousness can only be on one of 3 things. The first thing it can be on is your external environment, everything that's going on around you. And this is going to be the information taken in through our senses, whether it's your vision, whether it's your touch, whether it's sound, the external world, and we're taking in external stimulus. The second thing our conscious experience can be taken up by is what's going on internally in our body, which we could call our feelings, which are again picked up by the senses in our body. All right, so we can be in the external world or we can be in our internal world. This is how we're experiencing life. We can be fully in our body or we can be fully in our external or a mix between the two. And we can also be in a third place, in the mind. Have you ever been distracted in thoughts, drifting away and not thinking about what you're doing or where you are? I remember myself at school when I was a child, I wasn't a very good student, and I was often very distracted. Apart from maths, which I liked, and sport or PE, which I was quite good at, I didn't really enjoy school, and I got distracted and bored very easily. So I'd be paying attention to my teacher, or at least looking at my teacher, trying to take in information about what she was saying, but really, I was in my mind. I was daydreaming about seeing my friends later, playing football, whatever was on my mind as a child, but I wasn't really present in my environment. And I was quite a big daydreamer. And occasionally, I'd be just watching the teacher whilst daydreaming, and then I'd hear, Adam, concentrate. And it'd snap me out of my thoughts and back into the real world. I was there the whole time in my physical environment, but my attention wasn't. My conscious experience was very much in my mind. I'm sure a lot of you guys can relate to this. Playing a poker hand, and in the middle of it, your focus just drifting off into something different or completely irrelevant to what you're doing. Or you're in a river spot and you're trying to figure out how on earth you got yourself in this tricky spot. What happened on the flop? What happened on the turn? There's almost like a blank of what happened, of misinformation, because you weren't fully focused during the earlier stage of the hand. This used to happen to me quite a lot, especially early in my poker career. And I remember getting frustrated at myself for missing so much information. And I used to be like, Adam, why can't you just focus? Just hold your attention and be focused once you're playing. And I would write down little notes for my session. Adam, focus. Adam, make sure you pay attention. And it didn't work very well. This sent me on a bit of a quest to understand what is focus? How do I focus more? So I started reading books on focus. I started watching YouTube videos while I was out at the time. I really started to understand what was happening with focus. This led me to understand the importance of eliminating distractions in your environment, creating focus blocks to make sure you've got full attention on what you're doing. But nothing really clicked. I was still getting distracted often, and I didn't know why. Then I came across a book called The Mind Illuminated, which is actually aimed at teaching you how to meditate to a high level. But this book gave me the missing piece, and it helped me to understand what I was missing when it came to understanding focus at a deeper level. And I want to share these insights with you in today's video. Now, our conscious experience has two interacting parts. The first is our attention, and the second is our peripheral awareness. Now, to show this in action, we can use the example of our visual field. So we have the attention, which is what's in front of the visual field, generally something that's central is in our attention. And then we have things to the side, which are on our peripheral awareness. So right now, my attention is on the lens of the camera, but in my peripheral awareness, I can see a mouse, I can see my laptop screen, I can see the microphone, I can see a lighting over there, I can see the sunset about to fall in the sky over there. So though I'm not constantly gazing at those, they're in my field of awareness. So the center of your attention and your peripheral awareness. Now, if something was to happen in my peripheral awareness, let's say a dog jumped out or something came crashing down, it would catch my attention. So I'd probably turn my head, and now my attention has been captured. So it went from my peripheral awareness to my attention. Now, this is really important, and this exact same process applies to the mind. Now, the mind is doing the same thing. It's trying to hold attention on one thing, but other things are happening in the peripheral awareness. Now, the peripheral awareness in the mind obviously isn't a visual field, it's in terms of your thoughts. Let's say you're in a poker hand, and your attention is focused on what you're going to do right now in this spot. But then a thought comes into your head, and you remember that you left the hob on. You were making food earlier, and you forgot to turn the hob on. So this thought was in your peripheral awareness. Because it's important, very quickly, that's going to capture your attention, and most likely, you'll be like, oh shit, and you run downstairs and turn the hob off before I blow the house up. So what happens in that quick moment is a peripheral awareness thought got labeled as important and jumped straight to the front of your attention. All right, that's an obvious one that we can see. Now, let's say you're about to start a study session. You sit down at your computer, ready to get into that session. But then you see a notification pop up, and one of your favorite content creators has just released a 10-minute YouTube video, and it's right in line with one of the topics that you're interested in. Now, you're torn. You're like, should I do the YouTube video or should I study? Depending on how strong your motivation is for that study session, very quickly, your attention could click on that notification, and before you know it, what was in your peripheral awareness of the YouTube video is now grabbed your full attention. So if we want to be able to focus and not have our attention jumping from one distraction to the next, one distracting thought or one distracting event that's happening, we need to work on developing stable attention. Stable attention involves the ability to, firstly, direct our attention to where we want it, and secondly, to sustain that attention for long periods of time. So how do you direct your attention? As simple as it sounds, you need to give the mind something specific to focus on. Many players find themselves getting distracted often as they haven't chosen a specific focal point for the mind. Focus doesn't happen by chance. There are lots of things competing for our attention. There are lots of things that are interesting or novel or a curiosity can take us. So we need to give the mind directions on what we should be focused on and why it matters. When it comes to focal points for poker, questions that get you to think about your strategy are often the best anchors. For example, some players might want to ask, what is my opponent's range? Other players might want to ask, where does the EV come from in this spot? You've got to think of a question that engages your mind and gives you something to focus on that you can use over and over again. So for yourself, first homework away from this video, think of a focal point that if you could remember it over and over and install it, that it would give you something to anchor to during your poker sessions, and it gives you a target of where to focus. Then it comes to sustaining your focus, which is actually a lot more difficult. If I ask you to play a poker session and just focus on what you're doing at the tables, you could do that for a limited amount of time, but soon distracting thoughts would come up. You would use your conscious willpower to choose what you're directing your attention on, but over time, you would have no control, no conscious control over the distractions that come up. You could try to use willpower to override them, but distracting thoughts will continue to compete for your attention. Rather than trying to stop the process of distraction, you need to learn to first spot distractions and then return them to the focal point. Over time, this conditions the mind to treat the focal point that you're returning to as more important than the distracting thought. This works the same way as training a dog. When a dog does a good behavior, you give it a treat. Over time, the dog starts to realize, if I do this good behavior, I get the treat. Do more of the good behavior. It's the same with our minds. If we train ourselves to spot distractions and return to the focal point, over time, the brain learns, the focal point is more important than distraction. However, there is one very key part of this that most people miss. This small detail makes all the difference between whether you're training yourself to be more or less distracted. And this is how it works. When you spot the mind has become distracted and you are able to return it back to your focal point, you congratulate yourself for spotting the distraction. This is where most people do the opposite. They will actually be annoyed that they got distracted. They will negatively reinforce the distraction. But what you do is you'll say, good job. I spotted distraction and I was able to bring my attention back to where I wanted it. This positive reinforcing conditions the mind to label spotting distractions is important and the focal point that I've returned to is more important than the distracting thought I was competing with. Over time, this conditions your subconscious mind to get less distracted because the focal point keeps getting labels important because I keep returning to it, and you keep congratulating yourself for spotting distractions, which makes the mind more fine-tuned to spot them going forward. Then either one or two things happens. You either become very good at spotting distractions quickly, which is awesome because you don't lose time autopiloting, or distractions become less and less dominant because the focal point gets labeled as more and more important. Over time, the mind gets conditioned like the dog that sits and waits for the treat. You focus on what you want to, and distraction thoughts or background noise that don't capture your attention. Now, it's good to think of your focus as a muscle that you can train. The more you train it, the stronger it gets, and the more you'll be able to direct and hold your attention where you need to. You need to do some work on this. Most likely your focus muscle isn't as strong as it needs to be, but now, every day, you know exactly what to do to direct your attention and sustain your attention going forward. Now, focus is one of the 8 key poker athlete skills. If you want to find out where you might have a leak in your mental game, I put together a free assessment which will tell you which skill you personally need to work on to take your poker game to the next level. You can find that in the description below. That's all for this week's video, and I'll see you in the next one.